Good evening, everybody. Normally we do call it the Liberty Blast, but for one night and one night only, it shall be the Freedom Blast.
All right.
So as Tony said, we take our 5 core principles, and what I like to do is relate a current story that you may not have heard on the evening news. I relate it, one story to each one of the principles, which are free markets, individual liberties, non-interventionist foreign policy, constitutional government, and sound money. So I shall start on free markets. Obamacare has raised healthcare premiums by up to 78% with no end in sight. On Tuesday, a study revealed that under the Affordable Care Act, rather than decreasing the cost of healthcare, some groups have experienced raises by as much as 78% in insurance premiums. The study, conducted by HealthPocket, a nonpartisan health insurance research company, compared average healthcare premiums before Obamacare was enacted in 2013 to the current average premiums in 2014. According to the Washington Times study, 23-year-olds experienced the greatest increase in insurance premiums, with men seeing an average of 78.2% price increase before factoring in government subsidies, while women have had their premiums increase 44.9%. The study also found that 30-year-olds are experiencing a dramatic increase, with men paying 73.4% more and women paying 35% more. The head of research and data at HealthPocket said the study was very eye-opening in terms of the transformation occurring within the individual health insurance market. Quote, "I was surprised in general to see the differences in terms of the average premiums in the pre-reform and post-reform markets. There was a higher amount than I had anticipated." The Daily Caller reported that major increase in insurance premiums for men can be explained by the fact that Obamacare bans insurers from charging women more, and by the fact that insurers are required to cover a plethora of services even if the customers don't want them, such as maternity and newborn coverage for both men and women. According to the Washington Times, the major increases among younger insurance buyers, quote, "could be a problem for Obamacare's long-term solvency, given that young people are needed to offset the higher costs associated with older policyholders." On individual liberties, Virginia police have been secretly stockpiling private phone records. While revelations from Edward Snowden about the NSA's massive database of phone records have sparked a national debate about its constitutionality, another secretive database has largely gone unnoticed without scrutiny. The database, which affects unknown numbers of people, contains phone records, and at least 5 agencies in the Southeast Virginia corridor have been collecting them since 2012 and sharing them with one another with little oversight. Some of the data appears to have been obtained by police from telecoms using only a subpoena rather than a court order or probable cause warrant. Other information in the database comes from mobile phones seized from suspects during an arrest. The 5 cities participating in the program, known as the Hampton Roads Telephone Analysis Sharing Network, are Hampton, Network News, Norfolk, Chesapeake, and Suffolk, according to the memo of understanding that established the database. This system was set up with virtually no public debate or concern expressed by elected officials who approved resolutions authorizing the database. Police departments involved in the sharing network are tight-lipped about the database's contents, refusing to say whether the contents of seized phones includes contact lists and text messages. It's unclear whether the data that's collected stays with the task force or is further shared with agencies beyond, perhaps with so-called intelligence fusion centers that exist in every state except Wyoming, to facilitate information sharing and coordination among local and state police, the FBI, Homeland Security, and other agencies. All over the U.S., local police agencies are collecting vast stockpiles of private information from people, some of it from people who have not been convicted of crimes but were merely stopped by police. The Virginia system is yet another example of this creeping expansion of local law enforcement surveillance throughout the country. On non-interventionist foreign policy, Al-Qaeda reportedly seizes U.S. anti-tank rockets after defeating rival Syrian rebels. Jihadists with the Al-Qaeda affiliate network known as Al-Nusra Front took control of several villages in Syria's Idlib province over the weekend and reportedly seized weapons from Western-backed moderate rebel groups. Al-Raqqa magazine, an online media group that routinely posts updates about the Islamic State and al-Nusra, said on Twitter early Monday that a trove of military goods, including 10 tanks and more than 80 anti-tank or tow missiles, were taken. According to the article published late Sunday by the Washington Post, Rebel commanders, activists, and analysts in Syria corroborated reports that moderate rebels either surrendered or defected to al-Nusra over the weekend upon the group's advance, with area residents adding to the paper that the defeated groups handed over their weapons. This could be a serious blow to the Obama administration's effort to create a significant opposition force capable of fighting the so-called Islamic State and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's forces. The U.S. planned to arm and train at least 5,000 fighters from CIA-vetted moderate groups. However, the latest setback may complicate American efforts. If either al-Nusra or the so-called Islamic State has indeed successfully seized American-provided weapons, then it wouldn't be the first time in recent weeks that efforts to equip moderate rebels intent on eliminating those groups have backfired on the U.S. Last month, Pentagon spokesman Army Colonel Steve Warren said a bundle of weapons the military had airdropped in the region probably fell in enemy hands. Unconstitutional government. 90-year-old Florida man faces 60 days in jail for feeding the homeless. 2 ministers and a 90-year-old homeless advocate in Fort Lauderdale, Florida face up to 60 days in jail and a $500 fine for violating a city ordinance that effectively outlaws sharing food with homeless people in public. Homeless advocate Arnold Abbott, head of the group Love Thy Neighbor, has been feeding the homeless for more than 20 years. As contemplated on Sunday, I was arrested for feeding the homeless and received the citation to appear in court, Abbott explained on Facebook. However, only 4 people were fed before an officer told me to drop that plate immediately, as though it were a weapon I was holding, and to go with him to the police car. After a time, I was allowed to get the food back in the van, and we were allowed to find a small church driveway where we set up and fed the people who followed us over. The City Commission voted October 22nd in favor of an ordinance that limits where outdoor feeding sites can be located, requires permission of property owners, and says the groups have to provide portable toilets, the Sun Sentinel reported. The law took effect last Friday. The city had previously tried to stop Abbott from feeding the homeless on Fort Lauderdale Beach in 1999, but Abbott challenged the city in court and won. He said on Facebook he plans to continue fighting the city over the feeding of the homeless people. On Wednesday, 5:30, we will feed people on the beach. When confronted by the police, which I expect to happen, I will present them with a copy of the court order from 1999, which allowed us to feed on the beach without interference from the city, Abbott wrote. It is my hope that they will honor that agreement, but it is a possibility that they won't, alluding to the new agreement which scrapped the old one, and I could be arrested again. Are government officials overreaching, or have terrorists suddenly rebranded themselves as homeless advocates? On sound money. Here, this is some local news. Voters approved transportation lockbox for transportation news. These are from everything that we voted on yesterday. Maryland voters made it more difficult for governors and lawmakers to raid funds designated for road and bridge repairs by approving a constitutional amendment to put those funds in a lockbox. The lockbox amendment proposed on question 1 of voters' ballots bans diversions from the state's $4.6 billion transportation fund without the governor declaring a fiscal emergency and approval from 3/5 supermajority of both General Assembly chambers. The General Assembly decided last year to put the measure to voters when it raised the state's gas tax for the first time in 2 decades. The trust fund is financed with revenue from the gas tax, vehicle registration fees, titling taxes, and other sources. It pays for items that include highways and mass transit. A broad coalition of business groups, unions, and transit advocates supported the constitutional amendment, though critics say it still doesn't do enough to protect the trust fund in a state where Democrats hold a significant advantage in the legislature. Among other ballot issues were questions A through I, which were all related to bond issues for the county. They fund a wide variety of issues and projects like schools, parks, preservation and greenways, public works, community improvement projects, agricultural and rural land preservation. These all sound like nice improvements for any community until you really dig into the cost. $277,699,000 was added to our public works credit card. Spend today and tax tomorrow is seemingly the motto. Had enough? Let's remember what Samuel Adams said. It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. Look around you and realize that you are the minority and you are among friends. That's your November Liberty Blast.